Awesome. That's perfect. Thank you.
Hey Nathan, how's it going?
Good, how are you?
Doing good. Let me ping Mike real quick, and then if he's gonna join. Okay. So out of our Think Big conversation that we had yesterday, we talked a little bit about the blackout periods, which is now deploy freezes MVC. And we actually discovered there's a different implementation than I was initially thinking about it. I was thinking that we would do this all from the front end, that you would set a no deploy on an environment, but then Nathan, you brought up that we could possibly start with the first iteration of a YAML file, and then the front end could then update a YAML file. So I just wanted to kind of discuss if that would be our preferred approach. And then we can start planning the front end for blackout periods for like 13. And I think that would give us 3 milestones in advance for design planning. And then the YAML stuff is what we focus on for this milestone, like as far as creating spec for it and the next milestone. But just wanted to get get on the same page with that and update the issue if we agree that that's the way that we should go.
Yeah, as I've been thinking about this a little more, I think that makes the most sense to me is to start with being able to define the blackout period just through the YAML file, and then building some kind of UI on top of it that for people that may not be comfortable with
I like that.
editing a YAML file. Yeah, there's a couple different ways we could approach like defining the blackout periods. But I think regardless, I think there's going to be a YAML portion of it. I think that's the best option.
Okay.
So
from a UX side, Hayana, how do you feel like what kind of acceptance criteria would we need to define on this? So for example, do you want to know the windows that people are looking for, if this is at the environment or group level? Like what kind of information do we need to start collecting to understand what the front end experience should be?
Yeah, like the first couple of questions I have are really related to the user flow. Is it okay, the audio?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
It's a little choppy.
So where would be the most obvious, or at least the right place to make this configuration? Is it an environment? Is it, I don't know, in a separate part of the CI/CD settings? So that's the first question. And also, would users want to configure this from the environment view itself? You know, and so as a user, how do I want to configure? Where do I want to go to configure the blackout period? And can we also, at this point, think about like if something is configured in the GitLab CI YAML file, how would that impact the project settings or the group settings, right? Would it automatically activated there? How can the user be notified, or at least know that the configuration needs to be done in a different place or not?
Okay, that's helpful. So say that our first iteration is in the YAML file, and someone sets the deployment freeze. We would want that to then appear on the relevant environment that a deployment freeze is set on this. And that could be a part of the second iteration. The first iteration would just be specifying it. And then, I mean, we would, I guess, need to show that this is under a deployment freeze in the pipeline stage or something like that. We need to, how do we bring that full circle. Like when somebody sets it in the YAML file, at what point do they realize that they're not able to deploy to production?
So I had two ideas on how we could do it through the YAML file. One would be we in the YAML file we have variables like you kind of say it only you specify the blackout periods in the YAML file itself. And in that scenario, I think it would be a little more difficult to show at like you're mentioning, like on the environments page, because we'd have to basically, from a technical standpoint, we have to go parse the YAML file and kind of figure out the non blackout period. Another don't run this, have some kind of keyword that says don't run it. Oh, sorry. I think my internet might be bad. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
So my second thought was that if in the YAML file you can say don't run this pipeline if we're in a blackout period, and then we have a UI that defines the actual blackout periods, and then we kind of store what the blackout periods are separately. So I guess to condense it, whether or not we store the blackout periods in the YAML file or we store them separately is, I'm not sure what the best approach is, but that second approach I think would be a lot easier to show statuses elsewhere, like on the environments page. The disadvantage is that if we go that route, we can't really do it. The MVC would be larger. We wouldn't be able to just do a YAML file solution.
Or we incrementally do the YAML file, and then if people use it, we just say, well, we don't support deployment freezes in the YAML file anymore. You have to implement it in the front end. Like we could break people's implementation.
Or we could also do, there's nothing stopping us from doing both and saying you can either specify it in the YAML file directly, or you can use this new way that allows you to specify it in the front end. And so like we could essentially have two ways to do it.
Yeah,
and maybe deprecate one eventually.
Yeah, that we would, the long-term path would be that we only support deployment freezes in one way. But I think like that's a part of iteration would be that we do deprecate deployment freezes. It would just be like the trade-off. Do we feel like offering something immediately in the YAML file where there may not be as much visibility within the application? Is that here's the experience that I'm worried about. A user sets it in the YAML file as a maintainer, and then their developers that are working on their project all of a sudden just see a failing pipeline, and they don't realize why they're failing. So they're wasting a bunch of time trying to understand why their pipeline's failing. And really it's because it's been blocked, like there's a deployment freeze. So do we feel like we could implement something in the YAML and have a banner that says, hey, a deployment freeze has been implemented in your project? I mean, I don't know how to then redirect them to the YAML file. I mean, that would be like a really hacky, shitty way to do it, but it would avoid, like, it could avoid the need to parse the YAML and show an actual, like, polished view on the environments page. I don't know if the UX of that would be great, though.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about. I think regardless, like, what method we decide to go, like for the MVC or however way the users have to configure this, I think we need to find a way to notify people, like either on a project or a group level, right, that this is happening. So we have the deployments appearing in so many, in so many different areas in the product. So not only in the product, in the deployment phase, but the environment overview. Do we want to show this in the merge request, or can we show this as, you know, on a higher level, project or group level, so you know that this is, you know, it's frozen for now.
Nathan, how else do you think we'd be able to notify, and this might be a back-end question, so feel free to push back, notify users that something has been set in the YAML file for a deployment freeze? Like, how else could we tell them that?
Are you thinking that when someone goes and updates a blackout period that they would be notified, or more just that to let them know when their pipeline isn't deploying? That's why.
So I think that we could say once a deployment freeze has been set on a project for all subscribers to that project, they would be notified that a deployment freeze has been set. And then they would understand that the deployment freeze means that their pipelines might be failing at the deployment stage. But then we would need to prescribe in our documentation that once a YAML file is updated to include deployment is not allowed during X, Y, and Z, or deployment is only allowed during X, Y, and Z, which we could support both in the YAML file, which is a cool way to look at it.
Yep.
I think that the notifying the subscribers would be great, but then that means people could get spammed, but I would rather know that my pipeline is going to fail than not know. We would just have to tell people that they would need to subscribe or be a member of the project.
Yeah. One thing, I don't think that the implementation that I'm imagining would necessarily make the pipelines fail. More than likely, it would just skip the stage altogether. And we already kind of support that. I was just looking, let me show you what that looks like. And this might be enough that we maybe don't have to build anything special. So you can see on this merge request here, this review stage was skipped. I don't know if it's okay, if you can see that. So like the test stage was passed, but the review stage was skipped. And I'd have to look into this a little more, but I think we could do something similar where we could just skip the stage. So we'd skip the deployment stage if we're in a blackout window. And I think that is a pretty natural user experience if someone saw, oh, the deployment stage has been skipped. It's not like it's failed, it's just it hasn't been run. And so I don't know, we might not need a special UI to alert them if that's the case.
I love that idea. I love that idea. This makes perfect sense. It's a very natural experience. We may want to know though if people can't see their changes in production. So say that I am a maintainer on a project with somebody else. The other maintainer sets the YAML file to say that we have a deployment freeze. And all of a sudden I'm deploying and I say I want to merge something, and then it skips the deployment to production. I didn't know that my other maintainer set that. So then I may go in and see, hey, maintainer X updated the YAML file to have a deployment freeze. I just want to make sure that we are pushing information to people. And I think that's where we can fix out the notifications at the project level, and then reuse the skipping front end. I think that makes sense.
It's a little bit tricky because the way I'm envisioning the deployment blackout windows to be implemented would be kind of on a per job basis. So one job might have a different deployment window than another one. Like it wouldn't necessarily be a project-wide deployment blackout window, but I guess maybe it could be.
Yeah, because people could use all the jobs in that project, right? So it could be everybody in that project could be focused on deploying to a specific environment or to production, right?
Yeah. Would you ever want to have different blackout periods for like different environments? So maybe you can push to some kind of QA Monday through Friday, but you can only push to production on Monday or something like that.
We should build it with that. Yeah, because I could see that there might be a project that has multiple production environments or multiple protected environments. And as a result, they may say, I only want people using this environment during these days. I could see that use case being there, which might make it harder to implement. Or I guess in the YAML file, it would still work the same. They would just specify that variable, right? Like skip this during this window. Yeah.
Okay. I'm thinking about this more. I guess maybe the blackout window shouldn't be on a per job level, but it would be you'd attach it to the actual environment. That would probably make more sense.
That's how I was thinking about it. And the way that this MVC is written is at the environment level.
Okay. So yeah, I feel like there'd definitely be some way to, like, we could parse the YAML file if it's a kind of attached to the environment. I don't think it would be a huge problem to pull that out of the YAML file and display that somewhere in the UI. I don't know if we do that now, so it might be a little bit bigger of an undertaking to show that kind of status message. So if it made sense, if we could do without that for an MVC, that might be a good way to start and then add that in later. But I do think that would be possible.
Okay. So I'm curious a little bit more about how we would go about like specifying to users to update their YAML files if they want to include a deployment window. Would this just be like a sample template for them to leverage and then they bring it into their project, or how do we support that?
My thought was, to start with, I think we would just need to document it probably I can post this little section in the environment YAML reference. Like, this is kind of the go-to spot everyone would look to when developing a YAML file. So if they're working in an environment, as long as it's documented there, they'll be aware of it. That'd probably be the first step.
Okay. Sounds like you're getting a fax.
Yeah, the baby monitor.
It's like, whoa.
Sometimes my son likes to unplug the other end, and then it alerts on the side.
That's handy. I could see that. My future kids would do that. I could see that.
Yeah. It's annoying when it loses connection in the middle of the night, because then suddenly it wakes us up, and it was just because it lost connection briefly.
You're like, dang it. Okay.
Yeah.
So we would then prescribe in this first MVC that a user specifies a deployment freeze in the YAML file for the environment. We would document how to make this YAML reference in that document page. So really the proposal is create the YAML file for how you would specify a deployment freeze and document that in our environments page, right? The first step. Okay.
Yep. I think that'd be a really good first step. Yeah.
And then I think I'll include in this MVC, once that deployment freeze is set, a notification to the subscribers on the project is promoted. And Hyana, we can kind of talk through that if that would be useful.
Yeah,
and I guess
that's a little more.
Go ahead.
That's a little harder for me to understand exactly how that would work. So basically, I don't know if the intention is when someone actually updates that YAML file, that's when you would want that notification to go out.
So if it's like a reoccurring deployment freeze, so for example, someone specifies in their YAML file, they only want deployments to occur Monday through Friday, or you can't deploy to production Saturday and Sunday, because those would be the same thing, right? Mm-hmm. That people are aware that is set. So how do we let people know that reoccurring window is set?
Do you want it when the blackout window begins, or when they set the blackout window? So like if it's Tuesday and I'm
That's a
like,
good
oh, we
question.
need to not deploy on that. Do they want to know right when I make that change on Tuesday, or do they get notified on Saturday when the blackout window starts?
There needs to be awareness, I think, prior to when the blackout period starts or the deployment freeze starts, just so they know that they're not going to be deploying to production that day.
Would this
But
be like a notification setting, or is it default in the project? So as a user, let's say I don't want to get notified, right? For whatever reason.
I think we would want this to be a setting so people can turn it
Mhm.
on or off, because they may not care. They may only work Monday through Friday, and therefore the deployment window is irrelevant for them. Unless if it's an ad hoc deployment window, then we could just, I don't know how we would, again, I'm worried about the visibility in people who are sharing projects.
Yeah.
So if there's only one maintainer and there's 500 people working on a project, like, how does that maintainer make sure that their people are aware that this is happening?
Yeah, because I think if you're going to do that, we should also make an update in the project settings just to add that this is an option or one of the default options in the when users decide to subscribe. So we could be like by default active, right? So you always receive notification when a blackout period is set, but then you can decide to unsubscribe.
Okay. I'll think about if that's necessary for this first iteration or if that's a fast follow. Because I think like we could say, yeah, we support deployment freezes now, but you are responsible for letting people know that you're doing that. Or we say notifications are a premium and ultimate offering, given that that's a larger organization and less one-person projects. Sorry, that was really gendered. So I think we could schedule those at the same time though. We could say in 12.10, we want to support generating a deployment freeze from the YAML file. And then as an ultimate feature, you can notify people that a deployment freeze is set. And that could be by default. Once the YAML file has been updated, people get a notification. What are your guys' thoughts on that?
I think that's a good way to go, because in my head, that notification almost sounds more complex than the feature itself from a technical standpoint.
Right.
So I'd love to not have to figure out all that notification stuff if we can just deliver the actual window, because I think that could provide value on its own.
Okay. I like that. And then we can learn, Hyana, once we go into our environment survey and jobs to be done, if that's an experience that people are really hating, like that I don't know in a deployment, like I don't know why my deployment skips when somebody else, like, so that would be the experience of someone, a developer on a project, when a maintainer sets a deployment freeze in the CI YAML file, they would just see that they skip deployment.
Yeah.
And if it's automatically set, so this could be a set and forget thing too, right? Like it should be designed that if you want to support a reoccurring window, that you could just say, I only want these pipelines to deploy, or I want them to not skip Monday through Friday. Like, I'm not sure how we want to like say that. In the front end, there does need to be some realization that things are not going through, right? Whether that's reusing what we have today, where it just skips, or a deployment fails or whatever. I'm not, there does need to be like, that is a requirement that they need to see that this is not going through.
I have a question, like how granular can the setup be? So can I decide to block the deployment for just a couple of hours on a specific day? Or how is that configuration, the YAML? Like, do I set the dates or set the time frames? Because it's also can impact in the UI, right?
I would say that we should tell people that they can choose day and hours. So they wouldn't be able to go down to the second, but they need to be able to, that's the most common one. Like I want stopping at, you can't deploy to production starting at Friday at 5 p.m. And then you can resume deployment at Monday at 7.
Do we need to consider time zones for that? Or what's the base time zone? Like I set something at 1 p.m. my time. would that have an impact? Of course, it has an impact on how people see, but would the system understand that as the starting time? Just kind of trying to understand if this is also
I
a
don't
setup.
know.
I don't
Yeah.
know. Nathan.
Nathan, do you know?
Yeah, that's a super tricky issue because sometimes you want it one way, sometimes you want it the other. Like you might say, I don't want this to be deployed on 15th. And then that kind of sounds like it's 15th in whatever time zone you're in.
Yeah.
But other times you might say, I don't want this to deploy at 2 p.m., which is more specific to my time zone. So I've had this before, and it's really hard to decide how best to go about it.
So
Um,
customers will
Only to think
expect,
about that.
yeah, oh, sorry. Customers will expect if they're used to using things like Zebia Labs or another orchestration tool that the system has the awareness of their time zone, you know? But then it's implemented across everybody else's time zone. So if I set 5 p.m. here, Ayana, that'll be 10 a.m. over where you're at, or, you know, Kraz, it'll be 4 a.m, like whatever it is, like that awareness is I can't deploy during this window, whatever it's been set. I'll update
yeah, I think that makes the most sense, is that you would set it in your local time, and then it'll be rendered in whatever time. When you look at it, it'll show whatever time zone you're in. But it is like actually pinned down to a specific moment in time.
Yeah.
And it's especially important because if you're using GitLab.com, like the actual server might be in San Francisco, but you're in China or something. So it doesn't really make sense to use like the server's time. That might be completely irrelevant to you. So
yeah. So
yeah.
The context to the user will be important. Okay. I got to get to another meeting. I'll update this. I'll add a comment to the MVC issue based on what we just said to document what we exchanged here. And then we can iterate on those comments and kind of get this MVC buttoned up. And then I'll create sub issues for notifications and any other items that we feel like are outside of the scope of the YAML creation.
Perfect.